Today we are faced with an unprecedented choice: to relinquish our right to vote or protect our health and safety. Because of the coronavirus pandemic, a great number of voters who had not received their absentee ballots were forced to choose to go to the polls and risk their lives or relinquish their right to vote. This is a tragic and senseless choice which could have been prevented by an all-male election. Given the current circumstances of COVID-19, expanding the use of all-male elections should be considered as pragmatic and saving the right to vote and the health of our citizens. We as voters are deeply affected by the current situation. Voting at polling station requires long hours, which increases barriers to the right to the vote and thus decreases voter turnout. It also increases election costs, and in the time of pandemic, it endangers citizens' life and health. Voting at polling stations increases barriers to the right to the vote and decreases voter turnout. People with disabilities, those who are in the hospital or have an illness, as well as those who are away from home for any reason, have difficulty exercising their right to vote. Thus, a significant amount of voters are prevented from exercising their fundamental right. Voting at polling stations requires long hours of standing in line. According to the Government Accountability Office, which conducted a survey of the average waiting time across 36 states in 2012 election, although some states waited less than 20 minutes, other states such as Virginia, South Carolina, Maryland, and Florida took longer than 35 minutes. According to Observations on Wait Time for Voters report, 35 minutes is considered a long wait for the majority of the voters. Voting at polling stations is related to significant accessibility issues. For instance, people with disabilities, persons suffering from illness, serving in the military, or living abroad, people with no transportation, and single parents that can't find a babysitter are prevented from visiting a traditional polling station. In her article, In the Pandemic, Every State Should Vote by Mail, Priscilla Stilwell, a political scientist at the University of Oregon, recollects during the general election before the adoption of vote by mail, 3 members of our department were unable to vote because one had a serious bike accident the day before, another discovered at 5 p.m. that his car battery was dead, and she was in the hospital having a baby. These examples make it clear that voting at polling stations prevents citizens from exercising their right to vote. The present method of voting is inadequate because not only does it raise barriers to exercise the right to vote, but it also increases election costs and endangers citizens' life and health in the time of the pandemic. It's challenging to capture the costs of administering an election. However, in 2001, Caltech MIT Voting Technology Project conducted a survey of local elections and determined that the cost of the 2000 election was about $1 billion. In 2017, they did a similar study. The MIT Election Data and Science Lab conducted a survey of how much it would cost for conducting elections in the United States, and it found that we spend about $2 billion per year. Additionally, in the pandemic, traditional voting at polling stations becomes a matter of life and death. For instance, last week in Wisconsin, voters faced an impossible choice due to coronavirus spread and isolation. Despite the pandemic, those who had not received their absentee ballots had to stand in long lines and thus putting their and others' risk lives at risk. When citizens are prevented from exercising their right to vote, or the exercise of the right to vote is costly and endangers a voter's life and health, the system needs adjustment. Elections can be conducted entirely by mail, and thus barriers to exercise the right to vote will decrease. Jurisdictions and states will achieve a significant increase in savings, and citizens' health and life will be protected. Although voting by mail was first implemented in Australia in 1877, the United States soon followed. Currently, 5 states, Colorado, Hawaii, Oregon, Utah, and Washington, conduct elections entirely by mail. And the 21 other states hold smaller votes are considered in the election. This is a form of postal voting in which voters mark the ballot papers, put the ballot into a secure envelope, put that secure envelope into a mailing envelope, and then return it by post instead of at the polling station. And those voting by mail have an election period instead of just one day to vote. Voting by mail enables voters to open and complete their ballot and return it on their own time if they return it by the due date. According to the National Conference of State Legislatures, voting by mail provides citizens with the opportunity to vote at home and take all the time they need to study the issues, and for that reason, voters often express enthusiasm for all mail elections. The spread of the coronavirus urges politicians to recognize that voting by mail is an easy, effective, efficient way of conducting elections, and for that reason, it should become the new normal. Not only is voting by mail a safe opportunity to exercise the right to vote, but it's also affordable and beneficial to both citizens and jurisdictions. A 2016 study of Colorado from the Pew Charitable Trusts found that counties' election costs declined 40% on average in Colorado after the Colorado voting process reform. The cost effect of voting by mail can clearly demonstrate in Figure 2, where average per vote expenses by counties were across 5 categories overall in 2008 and 2014 are compared. Mail balloting is also opposed by some citizens because of fraudulent concerns. Recently, President Trump attacked this method as corrupt and claimed that voting by mail could result in fraudulent activity. However, President Trump has not provided a single solid argument to support his claims. Voting by mail provides the opportunity to avoid going to the polls and standing in long lines to vote. Additionally, it decreases barriers to prevent people from voting, such as disability, illness, or away from home for any reason. And Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, in March 18, 2020, said that Congress needs to act to make voting by mail the norm going forward, to make it accessible for all. Not only does voting by mail contribute to decreased election costs, but also leads to significant increase in voter turnout. For instance, voter participation statistics show that combined average voter turnout in 1990 for the state primaries in Washington was 38%. When those areas went to an all-mail-in ballot, the combined turnout rose to 53%. Therefore, participation increased by almost 40% in total. In the current circumstances of voting by mail, it is clearly the safest and easiest way to exercise the right to vote. Additionally, it's cost-effective and it increases voter turnout. And to complete a vote by mail only takes a couple of minutes instead of a couple of hours waiting in line. If politicians start encouraging people to vote by mail instead of standing in polling stations, a lot of lives will be saved. So, implementation of voting by mail in all states has been debated for a long time. But today, in the dire situation of a global pandemic, we are forced to find a working, effective, and safe solution as quickly as possible. To summarize, voting at polling stations increases the barriers to exercise the right to vote and thus decreases voter turnout. It's costly, and in the pandemic, endangers voters' life and health. There's a viable solution to this problem because voting by mail provides convenience to voters and thus increases voter turnout. Additionally, voting by mail allows jurisdictions to save money, and most importantly, in the current pandemic situation, it enables citizens to exercise their right to vote while preserving their lives and health. Today, with the spread of the coronavirus, not only is voting by mail a matter of exercising the right to vote, but it's a matter of life and death. Thank you.